Sure. Well, as we've heard from Bob and Ken already, very important exercise here in terms of getting high quality data. We've been working over the last really 6 to 9 months on how to blend the two surveys together. We've gotten a lot of input from both the Environment Committee and Green Building Committee already. We've done some outreach to other non-AWC folks as well in terms of the survey that James Salazar will share here in a minute. So we feel like we're sort of fairly far through the process in terms of balancing that information, which is essential, and trying to let go of that information, which is sort of the nice to have but not essential, especially for sawmills where we realize that there may not be as many environmental professionals or staff around to be able to respond to what might appear to be a very burdensome survey. So we're really trying to balance the level of effort for the mills as well as the level of effort on our side to make sure we're processing the good data and keeping up the response rates that we've experienced on the environmental side. We are going to be recommending to the board, the AWC board, next week that these surveys go out officially next June, and that mills would be responding by the end of next September. So the summer window would be when you would be getting this, and that we'd run this survey every year at least to start with. That way we get a good quality data, and we realize that at least in this first year it may be a learning experience for the mills and for us as we get better experience with building the data systems that need to go into providing the critical answers for this. So we've been feeling very good that the survey does meet the environment, safety. Well, the safety questions will be separate from what you'll see here, because that's done company-wide. The other questions that we'll be going through today are focused on a mill level, which is needed for the LCA work. So I will stop there and again echo that we really look forward to getting questions to make sure that we're able to tailor this as best we can and get it wrapped up in the next couple of months, so that we can then work on developing the data management system and the online portals that you'll be using to respond. So.
Great. Any questions for Tim? If not, with the chairs of our Environmental and Issues Committee and also the Green Building Committee to share a little of the thought of their membership. Russell?
Okay, yeah, I just want to say thank you and welcome to everyone on behalf of the EIC. I think this is a great opportunity to work collaboratively with the Green Building Committee. I know the two committees traditionally have different focuses. This is the EPD is clearly something that's a cross-committee focus, and not just the EPD work, but the climate policy work. I would say I'm an infrequent attendee to the Green Building Committee, and as we were discussing climate policy, which all of this is really kind of focused around climate and environmental issues of that sort. I know the Environmental Issues Committee is traditionally focused on things like emissions and the mill manufacturing side of things, not the product side. And from our climate policy, we focused a lot on the advocacy work associated with carbon neutrality, and we thought that was a really important thing. And when I quickly learned in the Green Building Committee that carbon sequestration is the most important part of the climate policy associated with our work. But I think those are differences among friends, and I think what it helps me to think about is how important wood products are to the picture of climate, and whether it's through an EPD or through carbon neutrality and all of these things through carbon sequestration. It's good to be part of an industry that I think really has a place in this in the climate picture. and the climate resolutions to the climate problem. So anyway, again, just a long-winded way of saying it's a good thing to work together and look forward to working on these surveys together.
Great. Thank you, Russell. Ara, would you like to say a few words on behalf of the Green Building Committee?
Yeah, thanks, Ken, and thanks, Russell. And I made it to today's meeting. I'm very sorry about the last couple of weeks. Being on vacation was a little hard to be on top of meetings, but I'm here, happy to be here. And I just have 3 quick points from the committee side and from things we've been working on through the committee. One, it's just really important that we still maintain our competitiveness of our products in the market. And that's in the traditional green building markets that we're all familiar with, like LEED and Green Globes and others, but there's actually also sort of a non-green building market where people are starting to look at things like environmental product declarations for just their standard purchases. And especially as large companies want to be building out their buildings with some sort of assurance, that the word like lowercase assurance behind their products that they're selecting for their projects. So it's really important that our products can stay competitive in that space, and it's also really important that we do that as an industry. We have a really amazing story to tell with our products, but we have to show that with data, and we don't get to always just tell people. So people look to data. We have great data. We can definitely do this together as an industry. Related to data, 2 points. The first is that I know that this is a big shift to go from annual to to go from sort of the biannual AWC surveys to more of an annual survey collection. And one of the things we talked about in our committee is that it's a lot easier, we hope, to collect the data every year than to wait and try to get very complicated data every 10 years. So we're hoping that by a really good, easy, streamlined survey on an annual basis, it just becomes part of all of our mills' standard way of doing business. We have lots of annual reporting we have to do inside our companies and outside. And so we're hoping that a good, easy process is easier to do each year than to wait 10 years and have to relearn the whole thing again. So I think of that as just sort of repetition can make it easier. Let's make it really simple for our mills. Let's make it really simple for the LCA practitioners and the EPD creators to get this information. And then related to that, I think we have a lot of room for improvement in how do we actually collect the data. Systems we might be able to use in the future to make it easier to actually submit the data. The first step, though, is just getting the data and getting it done well first. And so I really appreciate the effort that the team's been doing to work on identifying the key data points, putting it into a really simple Excel format, making it so we know what data we're collecting. From there, the actual like digital systems that we might have in the future are going to be a lot easier to design and use because we're all really good with the data collection part first. So those are some of my thoughts. I'm really happy that we're making some progress and looking forward to today's conversation.
Great. Thank you, Laura. So any questions for Tim, Russell, Laura, before we jump into the actual surveys? Because it will go from talking about why these are so important to the real technical conversation about what it is needed. So any general questions?
Ken, this is Cedric. I've got a general question.
Yeah.
And it relates to what Robert was talking about relative to the threat to the EPD data. You mentioned that the weakness was participation by individual companies. Do we have a goal for how many we want to have, and do we know, can we contrast that with where we are now and see, at least maybe share with everybody the gap that's there and see what sort of, I guess, to maybe create a little more impetus to do a kind of a fundraiser approach or a data raising approach, you know, where we're trying to fill that thermometer to the level we need through our own networks, and just so that we're successful on that front.
Sure. I do have some information. It's not as robust as I would like it to be. we absolutely know how many mills and the percentage of production represented in the current EPDs, the six updated EPDs that Bob mentioned. So we run around, I want to say 20 to 25% of total production in each of those EPDs. There's an exception there, I think, for glulam. So I can share that. Ideally, we want to get those numbers, I would think, up into the 80% of production for representation. Now, how many mills that is on the various sides, I don't know that information, but that is something that we can work on in the next few months. I have been working on it, but as you can imagine, some of that data is difficult to come by. It's there, it's just I can't seem to access it because it's tied up in a proprietary database or something like that. But we'll continue to work on that, Cedric.
And Cedric, on the EES side, we've covered maybe about 60% of the production through our biennial survey, which is a lot less than some of the coverage we have for some of the other wood products. So, certainly higher than the EPD side, but not at the level that we would like. And obviously, when there's 130, 150 or more sawmills that we're trying to collect information from, that's going to be the outreach that we're going to need to be doing. So it's good to have good representation from the AWC side, as well as whatever help we can get from Southeast Lumber, Western Wood Products, or other allied lumber groups.
Good, thank you, Cedric. Any other questions before we turn it over to James to walk us through the lumber survey? All right, I've given James control. It looks like his screen is being shared. Should start with Wood Products LCA survey lumber. Hopefully you're all seeing that. Okay, so James, a little background on James. I'm sure many of you know him or have heard his name. James was directly involved with the development of our updated EPDs. He worked extensively with Athena on the Canadian LCA reports, and of course helped with the US LCA reports as well. So we use James to help us through these LCA, PCR, EPD issues. It's really a alphabet soup of things, but he's a great asset. He's been helping to simplify, streamline. Sorry, Tim. We're not necessarily simplifying surveys, but we are trying to streamline the surveys for ease of use. So James has been leading that effort to develop these streamlined surveys. So with that, James, if you want to walk us through it, that'd be great.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Ken. Yeah, before we kind of jump into this, I imagine that there's a number of you on the phone here on the call that have participated in the energy and environment survey in the past that maybe have not participated in the LCA data collection. I know that there's quite a bit more participation in the energy and environment part of it. And so what we're really trying to do is, the difference, I guess, is that this is more product oriented as opposed to facility oriented. And it's also life cycle based. So we are concerned, let's say, with where materials are coming from prior to landing at your facility and where they're going afterwards. So parts of this will certainly look familiar, particularly on the facility kind of throughputs and energy, particularly. But we are going to be asking a little bit more questions on the materials themselves, where your suppliers are located, where things are going, et cetera, that we need to do our LCA and EPD initiative. So with that said, this is our lumber survey. I know that there's a few of you that were on the call yesterday, at which point we went through the engineered wood product survey and also what we call a comprehensive survey. The comprehensive survey is really geared for those of you who are making multiple products under one roof. So it's a way for us to gather, I guess, data on multiple different products. What we've tried to do with this lumber survey I'm going to walk through in a second is really streamline it down as much as we can, focus on the key data that we're going to need from you, pulling out some of the things, for instance, air emissions, which we'll talk about in a second, that we can calculate ourselves to remove some of that burden off of you. But I really want to stress, and I can't stress this enough, that our goal in this is to access the data that you have readily available, that we're not trying to push you to be deriving and expending a bunch of energy, calculating things that are difficult. As we go through this, we would like to get data on all of these data points. They're all, data that we need to do our modeling, but we're definitely more interested in, if you get stuck, let's say if something's not well tracked or impossible to track or impossible to separate, that's perfectly all right. We're happier to get, let's say, an incomplete survey that has what, information and data you do have access to, as opposed to no survey at all, where you get to a stopping point and you figure that if I can't complete this, then it's of no value. So with that said, I'll jump right into it. You can see that it's an Excel-based survey. So there's a number of different tabs on the bottom of this survey. They kind of break out, generally speaking, what each part of the data collection is about. Because it is LCA and we are concerned with materials and energy that are going in and products that are going out and emissions that are going out, that's kind of how we tried to break out the survey based on inputs and outputs. If you have any comments with how this thing is organized, we have spent some effort and internal discussions, but I think part of the point of the call today is to get feedback on what doesn't make sense. If there's part of the survey you think that could be improved, that's super. I also should note that the survey is designed to be flexible. So if, for instance, there's not a data field for something that you think is important, or if you need to make a note, something that you feel like you should alert us to that doesn't really make sense how we've described something, this is a tool for you to kind of document and communicate what you want to us. So feel free to add rows, for instance, insert comments, all of that. That's another nice reason to use Excel, because it does give us that flexibility as we kind of move forward. So first and foremost, there is an introduction tab here that kind of gives you general information on the survey. It will have things like how we communicate and survey deadlines and expectations on that. Right now, this is just a draft and we are not to the point of distribution yet, so just placeholder information here. But once you do get this, it'll have the correct contact information, and potentially as we move to cloud-based sort of solutions, how that, it'll make more sense, I think, this general information. The introduction, I should say. The first tab we want to collect is really just high-level information about your facility. Again, this should be fairly familiar if you've been involved in the energy and environment, but we're looking for contact information so that we can potentially follow up if there are questions about data, just generally what your facility, the logistics. We like to keep records of all that. And as we start to get into the actual data portions of it, first and foremost, the basis for everything we do is on a product basis. So we need to know, for instance, to see the first things here are the total product output. We're assuming the units are on board feet basis, but however you like to communicate that to us, that is super. We have places in here for lumber products and also for co-products. So anything that's sold would go here in this tab. So chips, sawdust, shavings, whatever's a sold co-product. We have, and I understand that most of what's coming out of the mill is sold to some degree. It has some economic value. That's really what we're looking for here. There'll be another place in this next tab over for things like waste. We also, if you are doing some cogen and you're selling power out of your facility, then we need to know that here too. You'll see here at the top for the primary product, we're asking for transportation to the distributor. If you've looked at our EPDs and if you're familiar with EPDs, you'll know that the scope of those is cradle to gate. So only the production of the log, the transportation to the mill, and then the actual production of the product. So this information here is not going to be included, let's say, in the LCA results, but it is data that AWC is interested in collecting for various reasons so that we can better communicate the impacts on the emissions of the product as it moves closer to the construction site, wherever it's going to end up. And perhaps Ken can touch on that in just a second. So that's really what that's about. The transportation to the distributor, it is not part of, let's say, our baseline LCA, but it is important information that we'd like to gather, and this is, I think, the best format to do it in.
James?
Moving forward the survey, and feel free to jump in. If anybody, you can save questions at the end, or if you want to jump over as it's on the screen, that's fine too. Or you can put things in the chat and try and address them.
Yeah, James, it's Ken. Just I noticed on the distance. So is the distance and mileage average across the different modes, or should we have a distance for truck and a distance for rail, and then a distance for water, or is that too much detail? I'm curious to hear from the manufacturers whether or not. Again, these are average.
You're probably right.
Average distances for the shipments.
Right. Yeah, and because this is a draft, we are to a point where we can, let's say, have a column simply for truck miles, rail miles, and water miles. I'm assuming there's not a lot of water miles going on, but perhaps. And yeah, I think that you're right. That is rather than it's probably going to be a derived percentage based on those numbers. So I imagine we'll modify that just to capture the actual miles distance for those. That's a good comment.
Thank you.
I see a comment that we misspelled planer. That's good. Got that. Thank you. So we are trying to get this information. It is. We understand that. Let's say if you are using multiple distribution or selling direct, that potentially that's hard to get to, but we're really looking for your best estimate. This is information that is important. We know it's sometimes difficult to get to the distances and things like that where products end up going, but there is definitely a desire, I think, in the marketplace for more of this type of information to supplement what we're doing on the cradle to gate on the actual manufacturing side. The next part is waste out. So this is not things that are sold. This is really things that have no value that are, for instance, going to a landfill, etc. So we've got, just a generic wood waste, potentially some boiler ash, what have you. Typically, this is a pretty minor part. I know that there are markets for most of the co-products that come out of the facility, but whatever you have that isn't sold, that does go to waste treatment, we need to track here. And we also need to track what the actual treatment is. If it's if it ends up being a mulching material or something like that that isn't sold, but it is, it's not, let's say, sent to a landfill, that's fine. We just need to know that. Or if let's say if it's incinerated, those kind of information, the actual treatment process is important to know. And again, I said this at the beginning, but if these categories don't exactly fit with what you need, feel free to add others, insert lines, add notes here to tell us what you think we should know here. Finally, on the output side, we need to know information about direct emissions to air, land, and water. Now, the emissions to air, this is something that it's been ongoing for some time through the Energy and Environment Survey and through other LCA and EPD work that we've done. And we've actually are working with NCASI on developing a generic air emissions profile that is representative of the entire industry. So what we're asking for here is not for you, for instance, to derive air emission factors or air emissions themselves. What we would like you to do is give us information about your emissions control equipment, at which point NCASI will take that information and develop air emissions profile. And I believe there's some folks from NCASI on the line, so if they want to chime in here and give a little more info on that, that would be great.
Pippin, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. So thank you, James and Tim. So this is Vipin Varma from NCASI. So as James pointed out, we thought that estimating emissions in the context of this EPD development is something that we can do. This falls under the category of trying to streamline the survey so that we minimize the burden on you. As most of you are aware, it is difficult to sort of have facility-specific information on some of the parameters as it relates to emissions that we are going to be asking for. So rather than have each and every individual facility fill out their best case numbers, and then for us to have to do the QA associated with it at the back end, we felt that it was more appropriate to use our emissions database to the extent that we have source category averages for various pollutants. We think that ultimately, when it is said and done, when all the facilities, to the extent that you can give us numbers, once we quality assure it and bring it in, it's probably going to be comparable to what we already have, because the data that we have collected are basically representative of industry testing information that has already been quality assured and brought into our database. So we felt that there's really no reason for us to redo that activity while much of that hard work has already been done in developing the database. And for this sector, it is a bit more difficult to estimate for facilities to have good emissions estimates. So we decided that it was easier, as long as we can get some fundamental understanding of your configurations and information on products and throughputs, then we should be able to develop the emissions estimates that are required for this activity. So the way we are planning to do that is sort of develop a model sawmill / lumber mill, and then turn on and off equipment that is appropriate or necessary, and then use that in conjunction with the information that comes out of this survey that James is already working on to develop factors. So to that extent, if we have planers and sanders and if we have bag houses that are picking up exhaust from the sanding and finishing area, as long as we have those details about those configurations, then we can estimate what is an appropriate PM 2.5 number or PM10 number or other parameters as the case may be. So that's really the approach. It's a good way to streamline this activity and save you a lot of repetitive work.
Great. Okay, yeah, thanks for that, Vipin. So moving on from air emissions, I think we've covered that. We have other emissions from the facility. So we're calling it emissions to water. I have a note here that perhaps calling it discharge to water would be better. We can examine that. That's not a problem. But we are also aware that, once we get into things like emissions to water, some of these may not be particularly applicable or well tracked. If there are significant emissions and that aren't well tracked, then that's not great. But I imagine, that for a lot of these, this information is probably not particularly applicable. So don't get bogged down here on, let's say, the water emissions if it's something that is not particularly pertinent. If there's not significant, direct releases to water or soil, at the facility, which is typically the case. It's really here just to catch, just in case there are such emissions, that we are making sure that we're tracking everything that we need to. So we're anticipating that, those of you that participated in the LCA surveys in the past, you may have found that this part of the survey was probably quite burdensome, and maybe even put you off of completing the survey altogether. And that's really what we're really conscious of that this time around, to try and make this part of the survey as straightforward as possible. So switching gears now to the actual.
James, I've got a question on the water.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So if we were to, we have wastewater discharge and also processed water. You're saying that, right, we can pick and choose whether or not we fill out our wastewater discharge, even if we know that. But if we had processed water information, we could include that. It'd just be kind of at our own discretion. Is that what you're saying?
Well, if you have tracked, let's say if you have tracked flow, values for these flows, then we do definitely want to know those. I think that what we're getting at is if it isn't tracked, or if it is, for instance, what we're looking for here is the actual emission, the actual discharge to the water. A lot of times you'll have, we'll get this feedback where you end up getting a legislative emissions or a discharge limit. So you'll get a concentration, and that's not really what we're after. We're looking for the actual flows of the materials back to nature. And, I can tell you, having done these LCAs and EPDs for a number of years, that water emissions in the lumber industry has never been an issue. Doesn't register particularly on the LCA and EPD results. So it is something we're less concerned about. Now, that said, it is a required reporting metric. So if you have that information, we are required to ask it, and we'd ask that you provide it. But it's not to say that if you are tracking it and doing a good job at that, that you're at some disadvantage to those that, let's say, aren't tracking it as well because you're reporting it. It's, like I said, it hardly registers, but it is something that we are required to ask about. I see a question here too on production of processed water. This is just the emissions to the water. The actual water consumption and that kind of information I'll get to in just a second. That's actually the last tab on here. And we do want to know the actual water consumption at the facilities also, in addition to these substances that are discharged to the water. So changing gears here back to, let's say, the inputs of the facility. We would like to know the total log input. Let's say if you are buying, let's say, rough lumber and planing it, potentially we'll add something here for that. I think right now we're anticipating that these is mostly roundwood inputs. And we want to know, for instance, how far away that is comes from. And we know that, let's say in a given year, you may be pulling from multiple sites. So we're looking for an estimate here. Again, this is, logging operations are typically quite close to the facility, so we don't find typically that this is a really big driver of impacts in the life cycle. It's actually typically quite small. So we say here the approximate distance to the log yard or the logging operation. That's what we want, is an estimation, your best estimation of where this material is coming from, so we can incorporate the transportation of the green logs to the mill. We're also looking for species, moisture content. We know that this is typically, a range. A green log has a fairly high variability on moisture content, but we do look for that information so that we can accurately calculate the density of the material and thus use that to calculate the transportation load. So it is something we want to incorporate, the moisture content of the material coming in, but we do recognize that it varies quite a bit. And if, for instance, you don't know that all that specifically, you can just put green there and we can make some assumptions. We have our own data tables too on species density for green logs that we can make some assumption on that. But if you do happen to know a range, you have some information on that, then this is the spot to bring that in. And again, we are interested in mode of transportation. I imagine this is going to be all truck, and actually we are going to revisit this. I think Ken's point to making this instead of a percentage basis where you have to probably derive something, it would be better just to put, probably it's just going to be trucking. So we'll put a truck miles and potentially a rail or water just in case. But that is the information we're looking for here, is the actual distance, the logging truck to the mill. The next tab here really should align quite closely with the energy and environment survey if you've completed that one in the past. So we're looking for the amount of electricity consumed over the year, steam, whether or not you're doing cogen. We'd like to know about that here as well, the amounts of that. Physical fuel, so wood fuel if you're purchasing any, if it's internal, gas, propane, what have you. One thing you'll see that is a little bit different is we're asking for a breakdown of the energy use at the facility amongst the various co-products. Now, we understand that a lumber mill, primarily its primary product is lumber, and there's not, let's say, necessarily separate operations that could have independent metering at the facility. So I think what we'll probably do is get rid of this percentage distribution amongst co-products. It's not like I think that you're going to be able to tell us the electricity breakdown between lumber and chips. But we will include a note there. For instance, if you do have some independent metering, for instance, in your facility, and you do have some, if there's a reason that some of that energy use isn't really pertinent to the products we're looking at, to the lumber we're looking at, then we can exclude that. So that's really, this energy input, that's what that's about. Like I said, I see another typo here, I'll fix that. That is, this is the type of information that should be somewhat familiar, and in all transparency, this information, along with the kind of major material throughput, the amount of materials in and out, the primary materials, the logs and lumber product, and the energy, these are really the basis for our modeling. So these are more of the important information. So, if you get this survey and, you have limited resources, this is where we would like, I think, for you to focus your resources, getting these parts of it filled out, particularly this energy input, because that's really what is driving the impacts at the facility.
James, just to reinforce that point, I mean, in terms of the biennial survey, I mean, the category is a little different than the way we have it in our current survey, but hopefully for those that have been providing this information, in that other context, it'll be hopefully easy to plug it into this spreadsheet template.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So we've tried to incorporate all the energy and environment survey. We added a few more options here to kind of make it a catch-all. And again, if you have something else here that we haven't thought about, feel free to add lines and add notes as you see fit to communicate what's happening. The last tab in this data collection is the actual water inputs and outputs. So we're looking for here is, any water that is an input from that is a metered water connection. So if it's like, let's say you're drawing off of municipal water and you have information on that. Now we know that some of you may be, for instance, using well water or other kind of unmetered sources. That's fine. Water isn't it isn't a major issue in the EPDs that we develop, but we do want information where it is available. But for instance, if you're using an unmetered source, then just make a note of that here, and we'll make do. We can make some assumptions. On the water output side, again, if this is water, we want to. The way the water accounting works in LCA is you're only getting charged for what they call water consumption. And water consumption means anything that is inputted into the system that's not outputted directly back into what they call the watershed. So for instance, here, if you have wastewater output, that goes into, let's say, a pond that's evaporated, then we want to know about that. If it's measured and it's going down a drain, we want to know about that. Really the total water that's leaving the facility. And then we can apply the correct modeling to calculate the consumption amount. So I imagine you may want to add a line or two here if there's multiple things going on. Again, feel free to do that. But there are accounting rules that are kind of specific to LCA and how we calculate the water footprint part of it. So if you can just provide us as much information you have here on your water, then we'll work with that. So that's it, really. This survey, we've tried to make it as streamlined as we can. We try to make it as painless as we can. I imagine that, for some of you that have done the energy and environment survey in particular, or possibly have done the EPD or LCA data collection in the past, hopefully this isn't, a huge effort on your end, but, feel free, any sort of comments on how we can improve this. If there's comments on why is this important, this doesn't seem like it should be important, we're happy to hear that feedback. We're basing this on our LCA and EPD experience, having done these, a number of these. But yeah, if you have any comments, please feel free to let us know.
Great. Thank you, James. Questions for James on the survey? I realize there's a lot of information there, and we'll probably learn a lot more as we try to complete the surveys. And so that's, as Tim mentioned, that's one of our goals, is to get a near final survey to you yet this year, so those can get the details to see what is available. And if they have questions, we can answer those questions and improve the explanations that are provided in the survey. So
I've got a question.
Yep.
And that's on the trucking, the approximate distance to suppliers, a round trip, or a round trip distance, or one way?
We typically ask for one way, and the data sets we have include the backhaul. So I would say, yeah, definitely the one way. But when in doubt, like things like that, that's a perfect example of making a note. Like, let's say, you hadn't asked me that question, or somebody else, has that kind of question. If you put in there 150 miles round trip or one way, then we can make sense of that. But we calculate the one way if you give us the round trip. But yeah, things like that. That's a great example of when in doubt, just make a note.
Well, I think, and we can make sure that the instructions, or what James calls the guidance, is clear, that we would prefer, if that's what we prefer, is the one-way distance, to have you do that, so that we're not having to make a lot of adjustments. Because the more the information comes in under sort of a unified way, then when we do sort of the algorithms to say, wow, this mill logs are coming from twice the distance than everybody else's logs, it's like, oh, that's right, they're doing round trip. We'd rather eliminate those things on the front end so that we're clear to you and you're clear to us. So the more we can sort these sort of good questions out in advance, I think we'll all be better served.
Right. Yeah, that's important, Tim. You're right. I only meant that for things that, for instance, we don't, that come up later on. Certainly, if there's things like that we could clarify now, then yeah, we want to do that. That's really the goal of this call and our upcoming call here, our upcoming series of calls on this.
Great. Thanks, Cedric. Other questions for James on the survey?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat either.
Okay. So we'll do some more work on these surveys and get them out following our call on the 21st. Good. All right, let me get back on. James. There we go. So this 3B is additional information, and has touched on this a little bit, and I was hoping I could get Ara to help me with the with this particular, because she has some thoughts on this. What is this is not information that's required by the LCA or the EPD, but it is information that we think will be useful with the end user groups. And so by end user groups, for AWC, the end user groups that we focus on are the staff at USGBC or the staff of EC3, the individuals that are making the what's going into the rating systems and what's going into the standards that are going to potentially regulate carbon in the marketplace. And so the piece on fiber procurement and the different methods of fiber procurement is something that we feel will be very useful in a number of the user groups, standards groups that we work with. So, Ara, if you want to speak to what we're hoping to collect on the fiber procurement piece, that would be extremely helpful.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I think, Ken, you're welcome to share the slide, but as we found out yesterday, I think there's some changes we already know we want to make to it. So that's up to you. I'm happy to just speak to it, or you can share.
Okay, I'm not going to be able to get there very quickly, so go ahead.
Okay, so I'll just start. I think in reality, it's pretty simple. We just really need to be able to capture the percentage of sites that are certified to either SFI's fiber sourcing standard or FSC's chain of custody standard. Not chain of custody, controlled wood standard. And then of the amount of material that each facility buys, what percentage of it comes from certified forests that are certified to any of the forest management standards. And this should be data that's pretty easy to come by, that we already, as companies, have to report to the various certifying organizations. annually anyways. We may not do that at a mill level right now though, so we might need to do a little bit of work of how we collect that, and can we collect it at the state level like we currently have to report by. We can work that out. We have some time to figure that out. It shouldn't be, however, the complicated part is that most people on the call today are not the fiber procurement folks. And so teams and mills who have other people in their mills will need to work together with them to get this information. But for the most part, if you're certified to fiber sourcing or controlled wood, you have access to this data. Now, what Ken is showing, we found out yesterday, there's actually already some changes that we know we need to make to it. So for example, is the mill certified to fiber sourcing? It's going to be a yes or no. Is it certified to the controlled wood? Yes or no. And then of the amount of material you buy, how much is coming from certified forest? And that's also something that we all should have. So we'll work on switching or correcting the questions. And as I mentioned, we're going to work on is, can we do it state level or can we do it mill level? We'll make certain it makes sense. The purpose of this is to be able to add in eventually into our EPDs, potentially even to the ASTM standard, is the wood coming from responsible, certified, non-controversial. I can't remember all the categories of the ASTM standard right now, but we would be able to respond to questions around the sourcing of the materials that go into the products that we make without having to have anybody else recreate an entirely new system. We already have really good systems. Let's just give that information in the right way, in the right format to the people who are asking for it. Was that helpful?
It was for me. Since I know, so good. Thank you.
And for other companies who are on the call, Weyerhaeuser will also struggle through with this, given that normally when we respond to the AWC survey, it's not the fiber procurement teams. So how are we getting data from different teams within the mills? And fortunately, we have, almost a year to work that out. But it should be data that we are already responding annually through our other surveys to various organizations. Does anyone on the call have any specific questions or concerns?
I have a question. This is Cedric again. Are these going to manifest themselves in columns in the materials in tab? Is that how we anticipate that being represented? So we just cover it all at once?
I think that would be a great idea. I'd prefer it to just be part of the standard survey tab of material in Cedric. It's a great idea. If we can, and to make it clear to people, this is definitely something that is optional. It would be great that if we have it, but it is optional compared to some of the other data. It's not required by the EPD, but it's being asked for. And those of us who worked on the product category rule spent a lot of time trying to help the participants in that group understand that the management of forest lands was already covered under certification programs or responsible sourcing programs, and that thus the EPDs did not need to start trying to measure the impacts that were happening in the forests. So if we're able to pull this data forward into our EPDs, I believe that we will be able to alleviate some of the additional desires that some stakeholder communities would like to see.
Great, thank you, Ara. Other questions for on this particular piece? The other piece on the agenda, the other additional information was related to the what the people call that A4 life cycle stage, which is from the mill gate to the distribution center. So that has been by James when he went through the survey. So again, nothing that we'll report in the something that the end user groups will find helpful when they're trying to evaluate the impacts, the embodied carbon impact of various building materials. Any other questions then? I just want to add something that we didn't mention that hopefully we're trying to find some value in this for the mills. And what we hope to be able to do is if we can develop a robust online platform for the collection and analysis of the data, that we would be able to provide back to the mills a snapshot of mill performance relative to the industry average for that particular message. So of course that would be confidential, only be available to the mill that completed the survey to begin with, but it would allow the company then to at least benchmark that particular mill to the industry average. It won't be an EPD. We're not positioning it to actually be a mill EPD, but more a environmental indicator snapshot that the mill can generate from the database or generate and provide to the mill. So hopefully the operators see that as value added in participation or for their participation. All right. So if you have comments, email those to me. See if I have my email here. Email any questions to myself or to Tim. We'll get them to James. The plan at this point will be to review our notes from yesterday's call and today's call. We're going to then develop an agenda for the call on July 21st. And once we have that agenda, we will distribute it to everyone who participated on these calls. And of course, you can invite others that weren't able to participate to join that July 21st call. And what we'll do is we'll go over some of these areas that we've discussed, try to finalize the surveys, at least as near final as possible, and then talk about timing and make sure that everybody's on board with the distribution of the surveys and what the expectations are as we go through the distribution schedule, because I think that's important for the mills to understand that the expectations are going to vary, right? For example, the first time we send the survey out is just to allow the mills to work through the survey, see if they're collecting that data. If not, is there a process they can put in place, or do they have questions and give us that feedback? So we're not actually collecting data as much as we are just looking for additional feedback and trying to the mills for the next survey, which will be an important one. So we'll talk about that in more detail on the 21st as well. So any questions at all about what we discussed today? Anything for the experts that are on the call?
Ken, Ken, this is Tim. Let me just again thank Kevin and Will to be on, and I know they're sort of the face of other organizations that have members beyond AWC. So don't be shy asking questions here, and following up with your members, because it's important to get as high a response rate as possible, and that'll be cooperation across the full sawmill sector.
Great. Anything? If not, we'll wrap up early. So we're getting better at getting through the surveys. So James, thank you for
Good thing.
Okay. Well, everyone
Always good on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah, have a great weekend. And again, we do appreciate your participation and your attention, and we will be back with you on the next step. But for now, save the date and time, July 21st, 11 a.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Eastern on that Tuesday, 21st. So thank you. Everybody have a good weekend, and we'll talk soon.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.